Well, the housing conditions in Notting Hill were appalling. 1951 census shows that whereas across London 2.4% of the population lived in a density of more than 2 people to a room, in the Goulburn ward it was almost 13%. So these houses have been jerry-built in the 19th century for a population drift that never happened. They were condemned as unfit for human habitation in the 30s, and they were still being lived in the 1950s, so it was appalling. So for example, you would get around 18, 20 people in a house. There'd be a basement, ground floor, 1 or 2 stories above, depending on which part of Southam Street you were in. You would have 2 families on every landing. So my first house, 107 Southam Street, for instance, we had 1 room, and that was quite common. So that was 2 children, 2 adults in 1 room. No electricity, it was gas. Electricity didn't come till about 1955. The unluckiest people were the people who lived in the basement. I mean, these were all damp houses. They were terribly badly built, infested with all kinds of bugs. But the worst damp was in the basement. And the people in the basement not only had to put up with that, they had to put up with all kinds of things coming down into what we used to call the areas, dirt and dust and dog's mess, etc. So it was a pretty awful place to live.
There were an awful lot of landlords who were demanding extortionate rents. For example, there were landlords like Peter Rackman, who were well known, and I'm sure many others like him, who bought up a lot of housing and let it out at extortionate rents and required massive deposits before anyone was allowed to live in the house. And in order to come up with the deposit to pay a down payment on the property, people would often have to borrow money, and the rates of interest that were demanded were extortionate. So it was a very hard situation, not only for single people trying to find accommodation, but even more so for families and their children. The life that was led by everyone in Notting Hill in those days was very much on the street. I suppose it was partly because there weren't so many cars. I mean, we used to spend a lot of time cycling down the road, 3 abreast, holding hands in the middle, because there just weren't that many cars. That meant that it was very easy to mix with all sorts of people. You didn't really even know what kind of home people came from because you just meet out on the streets.
One of the things that saved us was, of course, that eventually they had to move us out of that housing. And the other thing that saved us, I think, was housing associations. They were the only ethical landlord in the area that would try to step into what traditionally was the council's role, and it's still a big role for housing associations now, an even bigger role. In terms of the difference between housing associations and other landlords, the welfare state was emerging. People were coming out at this terrible, depressing post-war period. You depended on trying to get a council house. There was no possibility of any of the people who lived around me buying their own house. No possibility whatsoever. This shortage was so profound that housing associations coming in to try to help in that situation and run as not-for-profit and run on the basis of helping people rather than exploiting them was an enormous benefit.
Notting Hill Housing Trust was started in 1963, and this came out of an idea that emerged from the Notting Hill Group Ministry. My father, Bruce Kenrick, together with Jeff Ainger, Norwin Denny and David Mason, recognised that there really was not only dire poverty but a real need for homes and housing in the area. And rather than just preach about it from the pulpit, they decided to roll up their sleeves and try and do something about it. In the initial years, they had a staff of 3 with a payroll of £5. One person came along and offered them a stall at Portobello Road, which of course was a very good market, and so they all raided their cupboards, and a bit like a car boot sale, but got a band along to play, and it was the 60s, and they thought they'd make lots of money. And at the end of the day, I think they'd made £12. So they soon realised that they were going to have to do things on a slightly grander scale. they recognised that what they really needed to do was to get the message out to the public at large. And a rather young chap, I just left university, was there on the steps and said, "What can I do to help?" And my father said, "Well, have you got any money?" And he said, "Well, would £7,000 help?" At which point my father was pretty astonished. He thought, well, actually, we could buy advertisements with that. And this was very unusual at the time. But the decision was taken to have full-page advertisements in The Guardian and other newspapers with quite graphic photo of the kind of conditions in which people were living. And so that £7,000 turned into £20,000, £30,000, £40,000, which could then be used for housing and have a much stronger impact. The emphasis of the Notting Hill Housing Trust was very much on retaining the housing that was there. They wanted to keep the fabric of the houses, they wanted to keep the community that people were living in.
At that time we went out to auction and we bought these properties in competition with Rackman and others, and then kept the tenants there. And homes that hadn't had any work done on them for 20 years and were really decrepit, we improved them, kept the sitting tenant with their low rent, and gradually, as they moved on or died, we would then renew the home again and let it at a relatively low rent to another customer.
I became a Notting Hill Housing Trust resident in 1967. I was a postgraduate student nurse at the Brompton Hospital, and I was referred by them. I was a one-parent family. I went for the interview for the flat to Blenheim Crescent, where I first met John Card, Helen Card, Bruce Kenrick and Elizabeth Kenrick. I was quite amazed at the, if you like, the poverty of their office. They were sitting on radiators and, broken furniture and whatever. I then realised that it was actually Bruce Kenrick's home, which amazed me. And he said to me, "I'm sorry, Mary, we've only got 4 houses at the moment, but we've got 3 in the making, and I'll definitely put you down for one of them." That was about May, and in the November I was offered a 1-bedroom flat in Cambridge Gardens. John Coward goes down as one of the greats in my life, taking this organisation from a very small charitable organisation with 5 houses when I first started to what it is today, a multi-million-pound organisation. The story goes that he was a housing manager at Richmond Council, but he was offered the job with Notting Hill. And even though Bruce was there, John was the person behind the ideas and put them forward. He was the one that helped set up all the committees, if you like, brought the professionalism to the organisation. He had a tough job in that in the beginning he had all these great and good people who was a charitable organisation, but he had to somehow bring that into the professional world because he was now going to tap the government for money and the local authorities. In order to do that, he had to put some professionalism into the organisation.
When I joined Notting Hill, it had a great reputation as a pioneer, really, in undertaking difficult rehabilitation schemes in Kensington and Chelsea. The other innovation that Notting Hill undertook was to develop what is now called shared ownership. At that time, you could buy half the property and rent the other half, and the half that you did not buy was retained by the Housing Association. So people sold on their half. It first came about when John Coward was the chief executive. He was determined to find a new form of tenure, and he did. It later became and was called shared ownership. If I remember correctly, between 1979, 1980 and 1981, it averaged the production of 800 homes from rehabilitating older properties, essentially in North Kensington, which was a magnificent and amazing achievement. The change that took place while I was there was the move away from rehabilitation of older properties into new build and undertaking new build schemes. One of the things I did was to purchase the Roots factory site for the development of social housing. And I always think it's pretty amazing that one could talk about a car factory site in North Kensington.
It had been the case that Notting Hill for a long time was not getting very good satisfaction ratios from their tenants. We decided we needed to tackle that.
Notting Hill recently, about 3 or 4 years ago, changed the relationship between the tenant and the housing officer. And this was done by introducing something called ATB, Altogether Better. It means that for everything that you need, or regarding repairs or complaints, you would then phone up your housing officer, and your housing officer would be the first port of call for you as a tenant. This is something quite new, because in the past, tenants used to just drop in, reception used to deal with a wide range of complaints that they didn't necessarily be equipped for. And so it actually developed and improved the tenant-housing officer relationship.
For my residents, I'm the point of contact for their rent account queries and for making sure that the rent is paid, for any tenancy problems, any antisocial behaviour, repairs and maintenance, lettings, cyclical work. So the full cycle of housing management really is done now by one officer, and we work across a smaller number of properties so that we can really give a dedicated service.
We are an organisation that really cares about people, and I think the best way to show you care about people is to meet them as an individual, to see them in their own home, to understand their family circumstances, understand their financial circumstances, find out what their wishes are, find out how you can help them. And that's really the philosophy of Altogether Better, and I think it's great.
I suggested to some of these residents, what would you think about, getting a garden club together, and maybe we could go and make some of these communal gardens look a bit better. One day we found this space here in Oxford Gardens, and it was a derelict bit of land with a nice sofa in it. We then got the group together, and the local residents came together, they looked at the plans, and we built this garden. And now the residents actually manage this site themselves, and we have a spokesman in the group, and people pay a modest fee, and it covers the maintenance of the land and the garden.
2013 is our anniversary year, and we felt we would take the opportunity to do a few things to remember it and to recognise what had gone before. And we asked different groups of staff to think up ideas. We've had a fundraising effort of a group of our development team cycling all the way to Paris. We did a podcast. I walked around the Notting Hill area with a well-known local historian. And one idea came from our current chairman, Paul Hodgkinson, who said, what about the spaces outside the houses? He said, why don't you offer a competition to the housing officers to have some money to spend on making it better. Most of the proposals coming in were about making an outside area more attractive and more usable for the tenants. So it was very much focused on just very small but very nice ideas about improving the garden and the outside area so people could have some communal life together. And in the case of the Brighter Places project, we had a garden area for some older people with dementia, we had a garden project for some young care leavers, and we had one in an ordinary block of flats. The future, I think, is still in London, still about meeting the housing needs of the poor, still facing almost insurmountable odds, but using the enthusiasm and the skills of a lot of people to make sure that we deliver that. We've bought a very large site near City Airport, the Royal Docks area, which is a regeneration area supported strongly by the Mayor. And we have two large sites there, and we will be building it out. We're close to getting planning permission, and there will be thousands of homes there. The second big initiative that we have been successful with is winning the support of Southwark Council to redevelop the Aylesbury estate. It's again an estate which has had a poor reputation. It's been regarded as one of the least attractive places to live in London, but it is in a great location, as Notting Hill itself was. And I see that estate as being an opportunity for us to demonstrate the same set of values, the same set of skills as we did in the early days in Notting Hill, to transform what was a horrible council estate into a new Walworth area, an area where people will be happy to bring up their families, That's not to forget doing rehabilitation of older properties, and we've had a great success in the North Circular Road, where we bought homes that were owned by the Ministry of Transport, who was going to widen the road. That scheme has fallen away and we've refurbished all those homes. Everyone's been able to move back in, and we're also building new homes in that area to increase the amount of privately owned homes and new build flats as well. So that's the sort of thing we're doing at the moment. Much bigger schemes, high risk schemes in a sense, but with steady conservative leadership that we have, I really believe these will be places that people will be proud to live in the future, and we should be able to do the same trick we did in Notting Hill to turn an area that's dirty, degraded, unpopular and dangerous into areas that are very attractive, good quality of life for the whole population, not just the rich.
It does seem to me to be a much better place than I remember it. I mean, it is much more cosmopolitan. I think the contribution of housing associations to people's general well-being and happiness is as important now as it was 60 years ago.
If Notting Hill had not been around, then the Rackman activities would have continued for far longer, and also over time those houses would have gone into the expensive private market, and there wouldn't have been access for people on low incomes to live and work in Kensington and Chelsea. So I think it was a very important contribution.
We are in a financial crisis still today. There is still an enormous demand for housing, and it's not just people trying to get on the housing ladder, which seems to be the focus very often in the press, but it's young people with families who literally can't find somewhere to rent, let alone to buy. And so I think there still is a very dire need for organisations like the Notting Hill Housing Trust.
But one thing I am pretty certain about is Notting Hill's basic mission won't change. That mission of providing homes for people who can't provide for themselves. That idea that we're there to help poorer Londoners live and thrive and be well housed in London. I don't think that vision is going to change. And I also don't think the basic type of organisation we are is going to change. Even though we're a big commercial organisation in some respects with a turnover of £350 million a year, our not-for-profit ethos and our social mission is part of what we are, and I don't see that changing. All the commercial activity we do is there simply to make sure we can do our social purpose. It is good quality. We sell some homes for £1 million, and they're homes that people value and appreciate. But all the profits from that go straight back into our core social mission. And I think that's a great balance to create, because instead of being dependent on the taxpayer or the charitable trust, we are creating resources here in order to do our social purpose. And that's what I think is so exciting about Notting Hill. So long as we stay true to the purpose and are efficient and effective and use the money wisely, there's no reason why we can't carry on doing our basic requirement of meeting the needs of low-income Londoners for the next 50 years or even longer.